Every Assassin's Creed protagonist is trained to kill without hesitation, yet the ones remembered as honorable are defined by the one time they refused. That restraint always comes at a cost, a chance at revenge or power let go, while the pain that earned it never disappears. Across 10 different killers, the same quiet decision keeps resurfacing, and it started with a man who chose to lock himself away instead of ruling the world. Altair ibn la Ahad. The most dangerous man in the medieval world had the deadliest object on the planet in his hands, and his final act was to lock it in a room and disappear. That is not what killers do. Killers cash in. Altair had spent his whole life earning the right to hold that kind of power, and when he finally got it, permanently, undisputed, no Grandmaster left to tell him no. He chose a door and a key instead. The official story is simple enough. Altair becomes the aging mentor of Masyaf, spends his final years turning the Apple of Eden's secrets into written knowledge, and dies around 1257 having secured the Brotherhood's future. That is the postcard version. What actually happens is a man who fought his entire life against blind faith in one object decides the only responsible move is to bury it where nobody, not even his own students, can be tempted by it again. He does not destroy it. He does not use it to reshape the assassins into an army under his personal control, something the Apple could absolutely have done for him. He seals himself inside the Masyaf library alongside it, codifies everything he learned into teachings that will outlive him, and lets the door close. No crowd. No successor watching, no last dramatic speech to a room full of witnesses, just an old man and a piece of godlike technology, alone, forever. That restraint becomes scripture. Every assassin who follows him inherits a brotherhood built on the idea that power left unchecked corrupts the hand that holds it, a lesson Altair could only teach because he lived it in total isolation. It costs him the one thing every dying man wants, an audience for the ending, and he pays it anyway. But putting power away in a quiet library is one thing. The real test comes when the man who wronged you is on his knees in front of a cheering city, and every instinct in your body screams to finish him yourself. Ezio Auditore da Firenze. Ezio Auditore beats the man who ruined his family and then throws him from the walls to his death. That is not a plot summary, that is the entire point. By 1507, Cesare Borgia is finished. His army is gone, his titles are stripped, his father's power is a memory. Ezio has him cornered on the walls of Viana, beaten, disarmed, completely at his mercy. This is the same Ezio whose father and 2 brothers were hanged in a public square in Florence when he was 17 years old. He has spent roughly 30 years turning that grief into a blade. Every step of his journey, Spain, Rome, Florence before that, has been building toward exactly this moment. And he doesn't take the kill the way you'd expect. Ezio tells Cesare he's leaving him in the hands of fate, and instead of executing him with his blade, he throws him off the wall. Cesare dies in that fall, on those rocks in that instant. But Ezio doesn't stand over a corpse and call it revenge. He refuses to make it an execution. He denies Cesare the dignity of dying by the hidden blade that killed everyone else who wronged the Auditore name. Compare that to Altair locking a piece of Eden away where nobody, including himself, could touch it again. That was restraint aimed at an object. This is restraint aimed at a person, at the exact human being who deserves it least, and at the exact moment revenge would feel the most justified. Ezio isn't protecting the world from a weapon, he's protecting himself from becoming one. Fans have picked this scene apart for years, and the read holds up every time. This isn't a man showing mercy because he's grown soft. It's a man who finally understands that killing Cesare with the blade would just be one more corpse added to a pile he's spent his whole life standing in. The Avenger becomes something closer to a philosopher, and he does it at the one moment revenge was actually free. Sparing an enemy. The personal blow is a single choice you make and walk away from. But what happens when honor isn't one dramatic moment at all? When it's a slow, thankless grind of choosing your people over your own safety over and over with nobody applauding. Connor Kenway. Connor never gets a scene where he lowers his blade and the music swells over him. He never even gets the applause afterward. Ezio's mercy was one unforgettable frame, a single moment you could freeze, replay, and put on a poster. Connor's honor doesn't work like that at all. It shows up in every fork in the road where nobody's watching, in every quiet decision that never gets a highlight reel, and it never once pays him back. Connor is the protagonist of Assassin's Creed 3, dropped straight into the middle of the American Revolution with a war on either side of him that doesn't actually care about his people. The obvious read is that he's fighting for independence. He isn't. He's fighting to keep the Mohawk community alive while 2 empires burn everything around it to the ground, treating his home like a chessboard neither of them values. and he keeps choosing that fight even when it costs him everything. He watches his village get destroyed. He absorbs the pressure of a war that was never really his to begin with, one where both sides see his home as collateral damage and nothing more. He has chances to walk away, to prioritize himself, to take the easier path that a trained killer with his exact skill set could absolutely take. He never does. Not once. That's the part that makes him almost impossible to romanticize. Ezio got Rodrigo Borgia on his knees and chose not to finish it. One decision, one legacy-defining image that gets replayed forever. Connor doesn't get a villain to spare. He gets decades of a slow, grinding refusal to abandon people who are losing anyway, and at the end of it, there's no saved village waiting for him, no peace, just power, experience, and a homeland that's already gone. Fans call him underrated for exactly this reason. His honor isn't a moment, it's a habit, and habits don't trend on their own. He's the assassin who did everything right and still lost the one thing he was actually fighting for. Connor was born into duty and never wavered from it. But the next man ran from every responsibility he had, chased gold and glory across an ocean, and only found honor after realizing what his selfishness nearly cost the one person who needed him, Edward Kenway. Edward Kenway spent an entire war insisting he needed nothing but a ship, a crew, and 0 attachments, and the most honorable thing he ever did was drive back to the one attachment he'd spent years pretending didn't exist. That's the twist nobody expects from a pirate story. Edward isn't withholding a kill like the assassins before him. He's not choosing mercy in the middle of a fight. His honor shows up years after the blood has already dried, when he finally admits the freedom he chased across the Caribbean was actually just running. The surface story is simple enough. Edward wanted money, wanted fame, wanted his name known from Havana to Nassau, and he got exactly that, while everyone around him paid for it. His best friends die chasing the same dream. Caroline, his wife, dies waiting for a husband who never came home. Somewhere in England, a daughter named Jennifer Scott grows up not knowing her father's a legend on the open water because he was too busy becoming one. That's where it stops being a pirate story and starts being a confession. Edward doesn't earn his honor by winning a battle in Nassau or outsailing a Spanish galleon. He earns it by finally sailing home, facing a family he abandoned, and choosing to stay. No blade drawn, no enemy spared, just a man admitting, way too late, that he was the villain in his own family's story. Compare that to every assassin before him in this list. They started good and had to hold back the killing blow. Edward started selfish and had to talk himself into showing up. Same finish line, completely opposite starting block, and that's exactly why his arc hits different. It proves honor was never a personality type here. It's a decision, and apparently you can be years late to it and it still counts. There's a quieter detail buried in that reunion too. The daughter Edward finally chooses is the same bloodline that eventually produces Hatham, and then Connor, the assassin who never had to claw his way back to decency, because Edward already did the clawing for him. Edward's honor came from finally choosing the right side. But what about a man who believes the honorable thing is to betray his own brothers, to become the villain of the story on purpose because he thinks it's the only way to stop them from killing thousands? Shay Cormac. Shay Cormac's most honorable moment is also the one that gets him branded a murderer by the people who raised him. Every man before him earned his honor by lowering the blade. Shay earns his by raising it against his own family. In 1755, he watches Lisbon tear itself apart, an earthquake and fire and flood that kills tens of thousands, and he becomes convinced his own brotherhood helped cause it by chasing power they didn't understand. So he takes the manuscript, then he takes the fight straight to the assassins who raised him. That is the entire twist of Shay's story. He is not protecting strangers from a blade. He is protecting strangers from the very people who taught him how to use one, and the cost gets paid in old friendships instead of anonymous casualties. Zero hesitation once he decides. He hunts former friends across New York and the Atlantic, and the game never lets you pretend that's a clean choice. These are men who trained him, fed him, trusted him, and he ends their lives one by one because he believes the alternative is more Lisbon's. Call it honorable and plenty of people will fight you on it immediately. He is, after all, killing assassins, the exact role every other name on this list treated as sacred. But follow the pattern all the way through and the case gets uncomfortably strong. He had nothing to gain personally, no throne, no revenge, no inheritance, just a dead certainty that unchecked power was going to bury more cities. That is either the coldest betrayal in the franchise or the most selfless one, and the game is built to make you sit in that discomfort instead of resolving it for you. Somewhere in there is a man who loved his brotherhood the way you'd love a family you grew up in, and he chooses to burn that family down rather than let it burn the world. That is a brutal way to define honor, and it is a long way from a man simply choosing not to swing. Shay let a cause bigger than himself override everything he owed the people closest to him. Somewhere else in this list is a man who cannot get that cause big enough, because the thing eating him alive is smaller and far more personal, a hunger for payback so total it threatens to erase the man carrying it before he ever gets his hands on the one responsible, Arno Dorian. He had a bloody hand practically handed to him, a confirmed killer, a name, a face, and every excuse in the world to use it. He didn't. That restraint is the whole story. Arno spends the first half of his life as a gifted mess, a guy who breaks into places he shouldn't, picks locks out of boredom, and watches his adoptive father get stabbed to death by Templar conspirators while he's stuck delivering a letter, arriving just in time to see the man die and just too late to stop it. Grief like that usually curdles into something sharp. His did too for a while. The surface version of Arno is revenge story. Watch him die, join the assassins, hunt the men responsible, roll credits. That's the trailer. It's not the arc. The real arc is Elise. She's the one who wants the killers dead on sight, no trial, no restraint, blade first. Arno is the one who keeps talking her down, keeps steering the mission away from pure vengeance and towards something closer to justice, even when justice is slower and less satisfying than a knife in the dark. He had every reason to match her fire. Instead, he spent years trying to be the person who could catch her when the fire burned too hot. Shay put a cause between himself and the blood on his hands. Arno doesn't get that shield. There's no order, no doctrine, no grand betrayal to hide behind. It's just Arno, his grief, and a choice to metabolize it into patience instead of payback, and it still doesn't save her. Elise dies anyway. Mid-fight, mid-revenge, the exact ending Arno spent years trying to steer her away from. He held his own violence back for nothing, and lost her regardless. That's the cruelest shape honor takes in this series, not winning. Not getting the girl, the revenge, or the closure. Just choosing restraint anyway, knowing full well it might cost you everything and change nothing. Arno wrestled his revenge into submission. But the next figure didn't just refuse to weaponize their grief. They took the death of a child and forged it into something meant to shield every stranger they'd never meet. Bayek of Siwa. A grieving father had every right to spend the rest of his life killing the men who took his son. Bayek did something worse to them instead. He built an entire institution designed to outlive every single one of them. Khemu died as a child, caught in a ritual gone wrong at the hands of the Order of the Ancients. And that loss is the engine behind everything Bayek does in Ptolemaic Egypt. The obvious path was revenge. One name crossed off at a time, blade to throat, problem solved. Bayek walked that path for a while. Then he did something none of the Order saw coming. He stopped making it personal. Working alongside Aya, Bayek starts hunting the individual men responsible for Khemu's death, and he gets his kills. But somewhere in that hunt, the mission stops being about his son and starts being about every other father's son. Bayek and Aya take their private war and turn it into a creed, a structural, permanent commitment to protecting ordinary people from hidden tyranny. That creed becomes the Hidden Ones. That organization becomes the Assassin Brotherhood. Every hood, every hidden blade, every whispered oath across 2,000 years of fiction traces back to one man in Siwa who refused to let his grief stay small. That is the part people undersell. Arno held back a blade to save one person he loved. Bayek looked at the same impulse and scaled it into a system built to save strangers he would never meet, in centuries he would never see. The Order of the Ancients operated in shadow, manipulating pharaohs and generals while ordinary Egyptians paid the price. Bayek had every reason to let his answer be a body count. Instead, his answer was an institution, a permanent structure of people trained to notice the same abuse of power and stop it before it produced another dead child. He didn't spare one target. He spared everyone the Order hadn't gotten to yet. Bayek built the creed to protect the powerless. But the next protagonist lived entirely outside that creed, a blade for hire with no order to answer to, which raises a sharper question. Can you be honorable when literally nothing forces you to be? Cassandra, a mercenary who could take anything she wanted from anyone, and spent her whole life deliberately not doing it. That is Cassandra's entire moral resume in one sentence, and it should not work as honor. Mercenaries do not get to be honorable. That is the whole point of the job title. Bayek at least had a brotherhood to answer to eventually, an order built from his own grief that gave his restraint a name and a home. Cassandra never gets that. No creed, no oath, no council of hooded figures waiting to judge her choices. She fights for coin across the Peloponnesian War in 431 BCE, hired by whoever pays, sword available to whoever can afford it, and somehow that is exactly the setup that makes her refusals count for more, not less. She spends the war protecting the people who hired nobody to protect them, villagers caught between Athens and Sparta, family members she thought were long dead, total strangers with nothing to offer her but gratitude, which does not spend. She has the leverage to extort every one of them and chooses over and over not to cash it in. Nobody assigns her that decision. There is no elder watching, no tenant demanding it, no audience to perform sacrifice for. She could squeeze a farming village for everything it has, and nobody in Greece would even blink, because that is what mercenaries do. She just does not. By the time her path bends toward the Isu bloodline and a staff that stretches her life across centuries, the debate around her stops being about what she did and starts being about who she even is, canonically, permanently. The character later confirmed as the true lead of her own story. That argument gets loud. It is also, in the end, a distraction from the quieter fact sitting underneath it. A woman with zero obligation to anyone spent a war deciding who got to keep what little they had left and never once needed permission to make that call. Cassandra chose honor with no rules binding her hand. The next protagonist faced the opposite temptation entirely, the power to take everything by force, an entire land theirs for the raiding, and had to decide whether conquest or something slower and quieter counted as the greater act. Eivor. Every Viking saga worth telling ends in fire. Eivor's does not. Zealots surround her at Ravensthorpe. Kings betray her at every turn. England hands her every reason to burn it to the ground and take what she wants. And for a while, that is exactly what raiding looks like. Longships, axes, monasteries stripped bare. That is the Viking the world expects, the one history books flatten into a single word, then Eivor stops. Not out of weakness, out of choice. Ravensthorpe grows from a handful of tents into a real settlement, with a blacksmith, a seer, a trading post, actual families raising actual children. Inside walls, Eivor chose to build instead of walls, Eivor chose to knock down. Every alliance forged across England, with Ceolbert, with Guthrum, with the fractured Saxon kingdoms, trades a quick, glorious kill for a slower, unglamorous peace. Nobody sings songs about diplomacy, they sing about slaughter. Eivor picks the option nobody writes songs about. That's the harder path. Conquest ends when the last body drops. Settlement has to survive winters, betrayals, and the next clan that wants what you built. Eivor bets everything on a future she may not live to see, the same bet every person in this list has made once the blade was already in their hand and pointed at someone who trusted them. Fans still argue about whether this counts as true honor or just a Viking with better restraint than the stereotype demands, since so much of Eivor's path is shaped by the player holding the controller. But strip away the choice screens and one pattern survives every playthrough. The raids stop mattering, the home does not. Nothing in the sagas forces that outcome. The story keeps steering there anyway. It is the same restraint that once meant sparing a single enemy, stretched now across an entire era, a whole coastline of villages that could have burned and did not. Because building a future costs more than ending one, and Eivor pays it anyway. Eivor chose to build a future rather than burn one. But the last figure in this story carried a secret that reframes every choice you have just watched. A man living by a creed while hiding a destiny so large it forces you to ask who was ever really deciding whose life mattered. Basim ibn Ishaq. Basim ibn Ishaq spends an entire game convincing you he is a good man, and the rest of the franchise convincing you that might be the biggest lie the series ever told. That is not a knock on him. That is the point. Every assassin on this list got handed one moment where the blade was the easy answer and honor meant putting it away. Altair sealed away power he could have used to rule. Ezio let a man live who tried to have him executed as a boy. Eivor buried a warrior's future to build a settlement instead. Basim gets the cruelest version of that same test because he does not even fully know who he is yet. In 9th century Baghdad, he starts as a street thief with nothing, and Roshan drags him into the Hidden Ones kicking and screaming. She does not just teach him to kill quieter. She teaches him restraint, discipline, the idea that a blade withheld is worth more than a blade used. Basim absorbs it. He becomes exactly what the creed wants him to be, sworn to protect life as much as end it, in a city where corruption and temptation are basically the local currency. Then the franchise pulls the rug out. later reveals Tai Basim to something ancient, something Isu, something that recontextualizes every choice he made in Mirage as a man who might not have been fully choosing at all. Fans still argue about it constantly because it forces an ugly question. Was his restraint really honor, or was it a mask on something waiting to wake up? Nothing in the games hands you a clean verdict on that, but follow the pattern anyway. A man taught to withhold the blade, who then discovers he might be the most dangerous thing the Hidden Ones ever trained, and still chooses discipline in the moment we actually see him in. That is not weaker honor. That is honor tested at the exact edge where every other name on this list got to walk away clean. That is the whole point. This video has been circling since Altair. None of these people are honorable because they never wanted the kill. They are honorable because they had it and chose otherwise anyway. And Basim is the one who had the least idea what choosing otherwise would even cost him. The most honorable thing an assassin ever does isn't pulling the hidden blade. It's deciding quietly who doesn't have to feel it, all the way down to the one man who never got to make that choice for himself. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.